What is up, YouTube? It's Rahul. I am back here today with another video, and we have a special treat for you guys. I have Draft the World champion Xander Pero. Xander, what is up?
Nothing much, Rahul. Just fresh off a tournament win and riding the high while it lasts.
Yeah. Enjoy your social media fame, the little kick you get out of all the likes. Uh,
Yeah,
so
it's a tiny bit.
congrats on the win as always. And before we jump into things, people who didn't know you or people who didn't watch this weekend, give us a little bit about yourself.
So I'm Xander Pero. I'm a junior in college, and I've been playing Pokemon since 2010. Started out in the junior division, worked my way in senior division, and then have been the master division for the past couple of years. Had a few years in Masters. My most notable accomplishment is probably third place at Worlds in 2017, and then since COVID, I haven't been as active online, but still writing articles, playing Pokemon in free time, and now have a online tournament win under my belt too.
Yeah, of course. It was awesome to watch. It was a lot of fun. So I know there was like a mini interview that I did with you, so I won't like tackle all those the same questions that like Kyle and Jeremy like kind of hit on for you. But before we jump into things, obviously 2014 to 2019, uh, tell me about the decks you played in those years and how you finished first.
So back in those days, 2014, I played Verzian Genesect, so that was one reason why I picked it in the draft. 2015, I played Groudon. 2016 was
Interesting.
Waterbox. Finished top 32, and then did not, and then made day two respectively. 2017, obviously second place. 2018, I was playing Bennett Garbodor and did not do very well. I went 2-5, and Rahul went 5-2 with the
Uh,
list.
I do
And then
recall this.
2019, yes, yeah, that was a big point of debate. And 2019, I did not make day two, and I won the DC Open with the Ganondorf checkmate.
Yeah, which was arguably I think probably one of your coolest decks that you I think brought out. Uh,
Oh, totally. Like I really enjoyed deck building that, and it was very tough to build. Took a lot of refinement, and then also just playing it in practice too took so much thinking as well.
Absolutely. So, all right, now that we've covered you a little bit, everyone here gets to know Xander. I'm sure, like, pretty much everyone knows who you are already. But if they didn't, now they do. So, draft the world. They picked out 8 people. Seemed like a very cool group of 8. So, going into the event, before we jump into anything, I want to just clarify: did you know your bracket heading into the draft?
No, I did not know the bracket going into the draft, so the entire first round for the 2018, 2015, 2019, there was no information on who I was going to play against or where I was seated.
Okay. So I have the draft pulled up on top of your face because I can't for some reason. Okay, I'm gonna minimize this picture while we do this, but uh, I have the draft pulled up right here on your face. Talk to me about your round one drafting process. So for people watching, I will explain what went on. So the first round, every single contestant played in the 2018 format. I presume that's because they had a Nashville theme song. That's pretty much all I can surmise. And then everyone would also end up playing, I believe it was 2015, because winners, the next round of winners and the first round of losers would be playing 2015. And then the losers in the first round would be limited, double elimination bracket. So the people who are in winners finals would not have to ever touch 2019, and the people who were eliminated would never have to touch 2019. So, talk to me about a little bit about your drafting process. There was a couple of very interesting decks on the board, a lot of top four decks, but a couple of the top 8 decks that didn't really, um, I guess, people don't really talk about. And also for people watching, the first turn rules were the same that were on PTCGO, so it wasn't like. So it kind of probably played into your drafting process a little bit. So I just threw a bunch at you at once. Tackle it as you will.
So going into the tournament, uh, I knew of the decks that were going to be like present. So from that subset of the 24 that made top eight in three divisions, I knew which of them I would be picking from. Speaking with the supporter rule, I also knew that that would be a big not issue, but a big change from those past formats. So for example, Archie's Blastoise, very dependent on getting Archie's Ace in the hole, getting a Blastoise out as soon as possible. And with the supporter change, now your opponent could force you to go first and miss that sort of turn. So you would get all the disadvantages of going first, and then your opponent would reap the benefits, like playing the support card first. So it's almost as if your opponent would have old format rules where you Archies would just be like a turn behind
Sure.
comparatively instead of just going first. So that was one thing that played into my drafting process is figuring out what decks did well or improved with the supporter change and which didn't. So for example, 2018 Buzzwole decks improved greatly because especially in the Zoroark matchup because you would
Absolutely.
choose to go second in every matchup and then you would just be able to cripple the setup with like a Guzma or something, get off the first attack and the first supporter. Other decks like Zoroark did not turn out well with that because you couldn't bridge it on turn 1 anymore. So you would choose to go second, and your opponent would get a free turn before you started the game, such like an attachment on a Buzzwole or some other of the like.
Or even a Rockruff, which is
So,
scary.
yes, honestly. And other than that, I knew there were a couple decks that I wanted to pick up in those years. So a majority of my testing was done in 2015 and 2019 because I knew that I wanted Buzzwole Garbodor in 2018. In hindsight, that was the best deck in format, and I knew that it had really good matchups going into a lot of decks, especially with the supporter change, and would it be able to capitalize off of being able to go first or second with ease. So I was basically locked on picking 2018, and most of my time was spent for looking at 2015 and 2019. For 2015, I realized that it was a big triangle of sort of what matchup you want to pick. You can either pick Toad Bats, Toad Manectric Bats, or Landy Bats, being like a bat deck,
Mm-hmm.
and you would be favored into the likes of Donphan, and then the other third would be like the two Mega Manectric decks. That was the kind of circle that I was looking at in my head.
Sure.
Other decks like the Fairy Box, which I did a little bit of testing with, the Toad Aromatisse, that was a pretty cool deck. Cling Clang was another one that I did some testing with, but never really considered picking. And Night March also was another deck that like sort of fit in the circle somewhere, but wasn't a part of that big three.
Sure.
And for 2019, I really don't have much experience with any of those decks because I focused
That
solely
is
on
true.
Checkmate. Yeah. So when I opened it up and saw that Checkmate wasn't on the list, obviously because it didn't top 8.
Obviously.
Yeah. I was kind of at a loss for what I wanted to pick. I thought that the Judge Pikarom deck was the best deck on paper. That or Firebox would, or Mewtwo even would be like all solid picks. Because a lot of those decks in 2019, this is like the completely full in information era. Everyone usually has good deck lists at this point, and there were so many decks that I could pick that it felt like I wouldn't need to. I would be spoiled for choice. Whereas, for example, if I didn't get Buzzwole Garbodor in 2018, then I wouldn't really know what I would want to play. Because I felt like there were more viable decks in 2019 than 2015 or 2018.
Sure. I think that
So
makes
I
sense.
knew going in that I wanted to first pick 2018, and then that left me with what I would do for 2019 or 2015. And this is where Naganadel Quagsire comes in. So it turns out a lot of those decks in 2019 do not have good answers to Keldeo GX. Specifically, all of the Mewtwo decks just have no way to beat multiple Keldeos. And then the other decks like Blacephalon and Firebox, and then the Pikarom lists would have varying counters. So Blacephalon, obviously you have Naganadel as an attacker, and the Firebox I think played one or two Turtonator, as well as Ninetales as a way to two-shot. So they had some form of counter that would probably be enough some percent of the time. Maybe it's 50-50, maybe it's slightly unfavorable, either way.
Sure.
But then there were all the auto wins that I could just immediately pair into and just win relatively easily, like Henry's Mewtwo deck or Cassio's Mewtwo deck that Natalia picked. And then I think the other like the Pidgeotto control that Chase picked, that would have also been an auto win. So I was expecting to have at least 4 out of 7 auto wins of those people that I would play against.
Sure.
And I think it ended up being 3 auto wins with the 2 Mewtwo's and the Pidgeys, the Firebox, the Blounds, and the Pikarom, which Pablo played, which I eventually played against. Those are sort of more toss-up-y because they've got all the ways to counter it, whether it's the power plants, the Blounds, Naganadel, or the Firebox attackers. But because of my lack of experience, I decided I was just going to pick Naganadel and Quagsire and hope to hit an auto win.
Did you know the list ahead of time?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the list were public. So I saw the list, and I saw some suspicious cards in there, and I decided to pick it anyway.
Okay.
Considering that I actually had first pick for 2019, I could have. I mean, a more conventional pick would have been to pick some good 2019 deck, like
Yeah.
Firebox or the Pika Judge deck. Those would have been very solid picks, and I would have probably been fine, maybe misplayed here and there, but also done fine. But I wanted to pick it just because I could, and also, I don't know, have fun, I guess.
Sure.
And that leads me to the final part of my strategy, which was to get a good counter pick for 2015, because there were so many good decks in 2015 and I felt comfortable because that was the most matchups I played with it, then I wanted to pick a deck that would have a good counter matchup into the other players. So even though I wouldn't know where I was seated, I could pick my best deck based on the meta. So for example, Don Fan is unfavored against Toad Bats and Toad Electric Bats, goes even against Archie Stoys and Landy Bats, and then is favorable or auto win against everything else. So I had, of those 7, 3 good matchups, 2 evens, and 2 unfavorables, which was the best out of the remaining decks that I could have picked. So maybe I could have gotten some better 2015 deck, but at the expense of my 2018 choice or 2019 if I had gone with a different strategy. I guess one thing I could have done instead is perhaps pick 2018 and then 2015 and then get Naganadel Quagsire at the end. But I was worried that maybe someone else would be bold enough to pick that, and then the other deck that I would want to fall back on, like the Pika Judge, would also be gone. So for my draft strategy of first pick 2018, pick up the Naganadel, and then counter pick 2015, it worked out perfectly.
Okay, cool. And so looking at the board, I now have pulled up on the screen because you can't see it, all the decks that everyone drafted. So in 2018, it feels like there wasn't really a matchup that you didn't want to hit. I feel like everything was something is fine. Zoropod is probably one of the ones that gives you a little bit of trouble, but that still shouldn't be too bad.
Yeah, I would say that Zoropod probably the only one that I would be a little bit worried about just because of the Acerola and not having a good attacker into the Gliscopod, as well as the Oranguru in the list. But other than that, I mean, I would still feel confident considering I'm Buzzwole Garbodor into a GX deck. Like,
and Buzzwole Garbodor's only loss was the deck that we ended up playing for Worlds, Banette Garbodor, and that deck does not hold up in this 8-man pot.
No.
Looking at everything else, 2015, like you said, the triangle kind of established itself. The only kind of sleeper deck coming out of this was Lydia picking Klinklang, which is a little bit interesting because I didn't even realize Klinklang did good back in 2015. So a very interesting pick on her part. But everybody else kind of taking the status quo. We got the bad decks like you spoke about. Chase taking Mega Manectric, not a shock to anyone here. Ross taking 3 turbo decks is a little bit interesting, and I think that's a very good strategy for when you don't know what the bracket's going to be, right? Like you just take 3 decks that their game plan is always just to go, go, go with Archie, Stoys, Ray, Marshadow, and Firebox. So looking at this bracket and everything, who was probably the contestants you did not want to face, I guess, off the rip?
Would you say like before the draft or after the draft?
After the draft.
I would say, I mean, in 2018, I was comfortable with everybody. 2015, I would say, as long I didn't want to play against Tord or whoever else took the other Toadbats deck, whether that was
Pablo.
I think that was Pablo.
Yep.
Pablo had a Toadbats deck. Landy Bats I was okay playing against. I did some testing in that matchup, and the Mr. Mime really helps. And then I would say the only one I didn't want to play would also be Archie Stoys, just because, as you can see, it has the potential to just go south really quickly, whether it's getting a little bit of a clunky draw or whatever else.
Mm-hmm.
In talking with Jeffrey, he went over, he's saying it was even, and I can see where he thinks it's even, just because of how poorly I drew in game 1 and 2. Like game 1, I didn't draw Fighting Energy and just lost. In game 2, I didn't get a Phanpy down until turn 3 or 4, and I was still 1 turn away from winning. Like,
Sure.
For example, if he doesn't draw that Shamaniac or that Ultra Ball when I end him to 1, then I would just be able to put up my Donphan, wreck the Fighting Stadium, take a prize, and then I have the Silent Lab in hand to then wreck again. So that's why I saved that stadium instead of just putting it down in the first place. So in hindsight, I could have played down the Silent Lab and then won over more turns with Spinning Turn.
Sure.
But that was the quickest route to just win in 2 turns if he didn't Lysan or my Donphan that 1 turn.
All right.
And then for 2019, the only people I didn't want to play were the people with outs to my deck, and Pablo was one of them, but it ended up working out.
Yeah. So those are the players with all the decks. I will now show the initial bracket on the screen. So if you don't want any other spoilers past the fact that Xander won and some of the players he played against, you can pause it here, go watch the VODs, enjoy yourself. It is a lot of really cool games, so if you guys haven't watched it yet, I do highly recommend watching it. It was a lot of fun. Like, I mean, I didn't think I'd enjoy it as much as I did, but there was a lot of really good games between a lot of really good players, including a 90-minute Zoroark mirror match. Very long, very long. But here's the bracket here for everybody. Let me make this a little bit bigger so you guys can see it. The first round was Pablo versus Lydia, Tord versus Mike, or Pram, I guess. Natalia versus Xander, and Chase versus Ross was our lead up. And then, well, I'm now going to show the day 2 draft because that's what happened next. So the day 2 draft brought 4 of our contestants left in the bracket, with Xander and Natalia facing off in losers semis. And then we had Ross, Cawthon, and Tord in the winners finals. Kind of I think it boiled down almost exactly how usually Worlds goes, besides maybe Pram not performing a little bit better. But Ross, no stranger to the finals of a world level event. So in 2014 and 2016, both the contestants had the option to draft 2 decks from each one. It was kind of like a pick 2, play 1 for all the years. 2016 had a lot of options for them, but 2014 had exactly 8. But yeah, so I'll let Xander kind of talk about his drafting process between both those years. You knew you were up against Natalia, so you had a way to counter pick or a strategy in mind for that. I'll let you talk about that.
So I knew going in that I would want to play Greninja for 24 or Virizion Genesect for 2014, and then probably Greninja for 2016. Just because Virizion Genesect, obviously I played that deck, and I think it was the best deck in format, and had so many good matchups in the field. And Greninja, just because it would be quick and painless one way or the other, and I wouldn't have to do too much thinking. 2016, being another format that I didn't have that much experience with. The one deck I did play in 2016 was Waterbox, which was not an option because it didn't top 8 any division.
Surprisingly.
Yeah. And I wasn't too keen on any of the other decks. Like, for example, the Darkrai decks are just all reliable. Greninja's reliable.
Well, Xander, I see
Stuff,
3 Vespiquen decks on the board, and I feel like you should have picked at least one of them.
I saw those Vespiquen decks, but I wasn't too... Last tournament I played Vespiquen, and I'm pretty sure I dropped after round 5. So
just a little bit of classic
really
PTSD. I get it. Good.
Yeah. So obviously, I was going to first pick Virizion Genesect. I was very happy to get that, because if I didn't get that, I would probably be stuck picking some, I don't know, like Aromatisse deck, because there were so many of them. So I was very glad to get Virizion Genesect. And Natalia picked that Darkrai, she had the non-Garbiter version. And then I picked up first Greninja. And then I knew coming back in that she would then have to pick her other 2 decks before I could. So I could get the final counter pick to her 2 decks, I guess.
Sure.
So maybe something that could have been smarter would be for me to not pick Greninja at all, and maybe she doesn't get a Garbodor deck, and then I pick Greninja as my 4th pick. But I was worried that maybe someone else would take it, and then I wouldn't get to play it in the first place. So
And also, theoretically, there were 2 good Greninja break lists on the board, with Cody's and Tanner's both being very similar, just a couple cards off. And Greninja you can't go wrong when there's a 4 Talonflame engine with, well, just don't price Frogadier.
Yeah. Cody had the balloons, whereas Tanner had males, other than like some small differences. And the balloons were just, I thought, really good cards, especially if Natalia picks Night March or something, because the males I would just get overrun by that.
Mm-hmm. So then the bracket panned out as we saw. The casters over here, let me pull this up because I think it's a funny picture, gave you a very nice D. Kyle gave you a very strong D in terms of your deck choice here, which, I mean, as a college student, you know a D is not good, buddy. You're not passing. You're not going through.
Not failing grade. I mean, I get why he did it, because I picked 2 Greninja decks. It defeats the whole point of double blind. There was no point to pick the second Greninja deck. I just thought
you just didn't want someone else to take it. And also funny.
Yeah. Like, what I should have done is I should have just taken, like, Night March or something, and then maybe tried to bait Natalia into playing the Darker Hydreigon deck. But, I mean, I knew I was set on playing Greninja either way, and I don't know. I thought the matchup into Mega Man Electric was still favorable, so didn't mind it either way.
Yeah. And then, obviously, that worked out in your favor, and then the 2014 match against Tord went also in your favor. That was a really good game to watch, a lot of back and forth. And then, this is the bracket right now heading into the finals. You had to reset the bracket against Ross, too, so I'll pull up the draft for 2017, and you can talk about your obvious dismay at what was not on the board.
Yeah. So I did a lot of prep for 2017.
No, you didn't. You were just going to play Espeon Garb.
That's because, well, for the draft, too, once I saw there wasn't Espeon, I was hoping there would be Espeon, because I would love to play that and run it back, whether won or lost. But considering there was no Espeon, I needed a fallback, And considering there are only 6 decks, it wasn't that hard to sort of piece together all the different combinations that it could be. So I made a little spreadsheet, or like a little decision tree of, oh, if this gets picked first, what's the best 2 decks to pick, and sort of went over my options.
Sure.
So after looking at the different combinations, I realized that if Gardevoir is not first picked, then the optimal play for second pick is to pick Ninetales and Gardevoir, and then play Ninetales because Ninetales is favored against all the other decks. If Gardevoir does not get first picked, then that's a winning strategy for player number 2, assuming optimal picks. Assuming first pick does pick Gardevoir, which I mean, I was
Gardevoir, I
expecting
think,
Ross
is
to pick
like
Gardevoir.
realistically probably the best deck on the table.
Yeah, like there was no immediate check to it, other than the Decidueye Vileplume, and even so, it's not as big of a check as like the Gliscopod Garbodor deck. Though honestly, in hindsight, maybe this Decidueye is more favored against it than Naoto's deck.
I think so
I
too.
did not want to pick the Golegarb deck because did not play Trashalanche. It had like 3 Acerola in there, which I guess is good, but I was a little worried about how that deck would run, especially if Ross picked up the deck that wasn't Gardevoir, and then I would be stuck running Gliscopod Garbodor into some other deck. So I knew, from my perspective, that I had to pick Ninetales and Decidueye in response. If I picked Drampa and Decidueye, then Ross could pick Ninetales and then have Ninetales into either Drampa or Decidueye, which are both favorable for Ninetales. Or with this strategy of picking Ninetales and Decidueye, the most optimal pick would be to pick Drampa Garb, and then it's a coin flip of who gets the good matchup, whether it's Guardian to Ninetales, Desi into Guardi, Drampa into Desi, or Ninetales into Drampa. So each
Sure.
of us have like 2 favorable matchups and 2 unfavorables depending on how it like flips away. But because he picked Rainbow Road,
Which does
couldn't
not.
tell you why.
Yeah, I don't even know what that list looks
He
like.
said that, yeah. He said that he thought Gardevoir was fine into Decidueye, which I guess I can understand. Like, if you
Sure.
do set up, you do roll Decidueye. But it's just so hard to set up with Idle Block, and even with the supporter change, Decidueye is still fine just getting Vileplume up turn 2, because you're so unlikely to get it up turn 1 anyway. And now with Acerola, as you probably saw from those games, it's just so easy for me to just have a single tap away with 2 DCEs, and it's hard for him to get that knockout. And if he doesn't, I just 2-shot his Gardevoirs, which takes so much extra effort then.
Yeah.
Melee DCE.
Yeah, looking at the board of decks too, it feels like Ninetales definitely has a pretty good matchup into everything on the board. Desi Plume was definitely a deck that you could never discount back in the 2017 meta, which is why Espeon Garb was so popular. It was probably one of the few decks that had a overwhelmingly favorable matchup into Desi. But given that it's not on the board, well, Drampa Garb could potentially play against it, but it was more of a 50-50 matchup as opposed to just like a clean sweep like it would be with Espeon. And it's interesting to see that Ross did not take Trample Garb because both that Trample Garb and Gardevoir are from his team. They're from X-Files, effectively. Like, Diego's Gardevoir is very similar to the one that Pablo played to get top 8 at that World Championships. And, well, Sam Chen did play Trample Garb, and it is Sam's one of his teammates, his direct teammates. So, very interesting to see that your 2 senior decks took out his master deck.
Yeah, my guess is that the Rainbow Road deck has Bisharp in it, which would be pretty good against the Ninetales. So he was thinking maybe if I play Ninetales, then he would play Rainbow Road into it.
Follow-up question, were you locked
guess is
into, after you, so I assume that you guys played your first set, and so say maybe you play Ninetales and he plays Guardy, are you locked into Ninetales for winners, or can you?
No, you could switch.
Okay. So, because that would actually be a very viable strategy if you chose to pick Ninetales and you were locked into that into winners, into reset.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because then if we were forced to switch to the other deck, then it would be whatever the second deck would actually make a big difference for what you had in back and how you matched
Correct.
up your first.
Which I think would have been really interesting, honestly, because Ross could have like theoretically tried to tank a matchup and just take a favorable in the grands because he had that advantage available to him. So that would have been a really cool advantage to have. Obviously, very disadvantageous to whoever comes through the reset, but I think resetting a bracket should be hard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like how it was played out. I think it would have been maybe too cute to have the double deck thing, especially because it's just for the reset. Whereas, I don't know, the point of picking 2 decks was so you couldn't automatically counterpick.
Exactly, yeah.
Double blind so that you don't. It wasn't because of a reset sort of thing.
Sure. So Well, that does it. You did win. It was actually pretty awesome to watch. Your hands were not amazing throughout the event, but you managed to make the best of a bad situation every time. Kind of scraping by on a couple of top decks here and there. Um, so definitely, like, tell me, like, I mean, I know you love drafts. I know you love cubes, all that stuff. Uh, would you be a proponent of trying to make Pokemon do something more like this? Maybe I don't know exactly what Worlds formats, but there's probably different Nationals formats. Maybe like multiple kinds of things in the same year, or even like, is this something you would bring to like your friend group to try to do in like one sitting?
Yeah, I think it would be something you could totally like replicate or do like casually. The main thing is just deciding what decks you want to pick from. Because if you go from I see a world where you could just bring a list of all 2017 decks, or you say everyone picks an archetype, draft that archetype, and you don't even stick to the old lists. So this was cool in that you were forced to use the old list, and that may have been a disadvantage. Say, for example, maybe I would have played a different Nagano Quagsire list, or I would have made small changes to like my Donphan list or something to make it a little bit better.
Yeah, especially considering the first turn support rule.
Yeah, like for example, I bet a lot of the Bridget decks might lean off of the Bridget engine because of that factor.
Sure.
Um, so I think it would be really cool if there were more drafting opportunities or ways to showcase drafting, because I love cubing, I love drafting. To me, that's as much of a game as the game itself, especially for this kind of tournament where drafting is, I would say, as important, if not more important, for getting good decks and doing a little bit of prep. So I think it would be cool to replicate, sort of do something like that down the line, uh, as long as there's cool ways to do it. The main thing is you need to keep track of what lists were played when, and how you build those decks again up is another challenge in itself.
Absolutely. Well, congrats again, Xander. I'll leave the floor for you to do a shout out. So yeah.
Uh, Shout out to my parents for being cool.
Hey,
Shout out to
shout out,
Jeffrey
mom.
Chang, who I mentioned on the stream too. Yeah, shout out mom, dad, and Finn and Joey,
Uh,
corgis too.
and the corgis.
They're supportive. Jeffrey and I talked a lot about 2015 matchups beforehand. It's kind of ironic that that's the one year that I lost in,
Lol.
especially with his deck. But he and I talked a lot about 2015 beforehand, and it was good to just have someone to talk to, bounce some ideas off of, and get some matchup help to save me a lot of time, especially because this is right when I started college and I was busy with school and everything. So it's not like I had all the time in the world to sit there and play games against myself in each format and every matchup.
Sure. And you guys can find Xander on Twitter. That's where he'll primarily be. I don't think he does anything else on YouTube or Instagram or anything like that. I think,
No,
I mean, you could probably follow his
no.
Instagram, but I don't think you're gonna get Pokemon. You're probably gonna get him doing some stupid stuff in college.
Yeah, you'll get college recap pictures, not
Yeah,
no
Xander via the
Pokemon stuff.
football game today. Haha, XDM cute. But thank you again for Xander for being here. Hope you guys all enjoyed this interview, and look forward to me and Xander coming back when events come back and beating everybody. Peace.
That's definitely.